What's good, y'all? You've wished for a hex guide and I shall deliver. So, in this guide we're going to talk about what skills to max, when can you stop, how far should you go, his awakenings, a mid-game, late-game, end-game build including artifacts, and then the usual in which kind of content can you use them, and get ready for a surprise with artifacts, and it is absolutely disgusting. But first things first, let's get into the skills. So skill wise, his basic attack is pretty simple, doing 100 to 120% magic damage to one unit, prioritizing airborne units. His second ability, or his first passive, each attack launched has a 20% chance to inflict stun on the target for 2 seconds. Damage to targets under control effects such as stun, freeze and immobilized state is increased by 60%. Important to note here, it needs to be a hard stun. I tested it out, the slow doesn't count, so your hex doesn't do 60% more damage against slow targets. So keep that one in mind. And then we have Fate the Hermit. When triggered by receiving damage, resists incoming damage and gains invisibility for 3 seconds. This effect can only be triggered one time every 40 seconds. So Hex can evade 1 instance of damage every 40 seconds. Obviously at max skill it is a 50-second cooldown unskilled. And now the most important part, Mad Truth. When triggered, increases damage by 140%, attack speed by 100, and reduces the attack interval by 50%, and replaces all cards with the Joker. The Joker is a card that does 400% damage 3 times and inflicting burning for 5 seconds. This effect lasts for a total of 35 seconds or 30 seconds unskilled. Now the big question is, what is this card thing we're talking about? That is one of his most defining assets, and that is his talent. So his talent states he gains 1 card of fate with each attack. Card of fate isn't an effect but can trigger other effects at certain stacks. So every 4th attack, Hex has a chance to randomly obtain one of the following cards. So basically he attacks 4 times, getting 4 cards of fate. Once he has 4 cards of fate, he's going to either get a temperance, death or strength card. With temperance, throwing 3 cards dealing 140% damage while inflicting a 75% slow, which obviously with 75% being the strongest slow in the entire game, and it is really noticeable if you use it on something. Death, dealing 500% damage and inflicting burning for 5 seconds, and then strength, increasing his attack by 30% and attack speed by 70 for 25 seconds, which is obviously a huge buff. And now Mad Truth, again back to the Joker card. The Joker card does 1200% damage and inflicts burning for 5 seconds. It is basically death, but on steroids. Steroid death. Alright, so skill wise, the most important part is, as with most champions, Hex's ultimate. So you want to go to level 4 on the ultimate, getting the 5-second extended effect duration, and that's the point where you can stop and then focus on other units to get them also to their appropriate power spikes. But if you really want the full potential out of your Hex, if you start looking to get higher numbers in Guild Boss, if you want him to do the most damage, be the most effective, you want to max out Mad Truth, which allows you to cycle his ultimate faster because of the reduced skill cost. You want to max out his basic attack, because basic attacks are his way of dealing damage. And if possible, you want to max out Fate Trial, but that is not as important because, for example, for Guild Boss it doesn't have any relevance, but it is quite helpful in other stages. And if you can get around it, Fate Hermit can stay on level 0, because it isn't really required for him to evade stuff either at 40 seconds or even 50 seconds. So that concludes skill ups. And now on to awakenings. Hex's A1 is really it's not really crucial, but it is really strong. So what happens with his A1 is he gets another card. So in his ultimate he normally always pulls, if we always go back to it, he normally pulls the Joker, which does 400% damage 3 times and inflicts burning. And on his A1, instead of pulling the Joker, he has a chance to pull the Fool, and the Fool does 500% 3 times as well as a slow and burning, so you end up with around 300% more damage through the Fool. Obviously that is quite nice. It also adds a rather decent amount of damage, and later in the video I'll also again go over it, why it's even more important. Then the A2 is rather standard, 300 attack, but as usual with attack being the base stat, the god stat in the game, more attack is always more good. Now we have the A3. So what the A3 does is it extends his ultimate as long as he basic attacks a target that is burning. He can apply burning by himself, be it through his cards or use the burning effect from allies. And so the interaction is as follows. If he pulls his card, so if he draws his card, he's not going to extend his ultimate because he's spending the time using his card, which is why before there was a certain problem with his interactions, but that isn't there anymore. The only thing you need to keep in mind is only the 4 attacks he actually does before pulling a card through his talent will actually extend the duration by 1 second. Now, A4, penetration. Penetration is always good. Penetration is nice. Ignoring extra defense, magic res brings him more damage, but it's nothing super crucial. Now, the interesting part. Each draw returns 1 card of fate and increases each damage dealt by the Joker and the Fool by 30%. So what it does is basically add in 30% more damage to the Joker and the Fool. So from 400% damage it goes up all the way to 490, and from 500 it goes all the way up to 590%. Not quite true. 530 times 3, so additional 90. Basically, both cards get 90% more damage. And now the interesting part, each draw returns 1 card of fate. So he needs to only basic attack 3 times instead of 4 times to be able to pull a card and then get the effect from the card, which is obviously going to do more damage than his basic attack or even buff himself. And before there was a problem with him not being able to keep up his ultimate as long, which is why people kept him at A4 for quite a long time and it wasn't advised, but now that they added in the 30% damage and the new exclusive artifact for Hex, which we're going to talk about later, if you have the chance to A5 Hex, it is going to be worth it. So far so good. Awakening's down. Off we go into gearing. Alright, as usual, left side first. Here we go. So for the left side, it is the usual candidate set-wise. Whirlwind set, Calamity set, Annihilating Might set, or if you're far enough, which I doubt if you're using mid-game gear, obviously also the Warlord set. Stat-wise, for the weapon you're looking for attack percent and crit rate, with attack speed just being a bonus, and armor wise you're looking again for attack percent and crit rate, and then if you can manage it and if you already find it, you can also already put on crit damage. So for the weapon you're looking for attack percent, crit rate, attack speed. For the chest piece, attack percent, crit rate, crit damage. Now onto the right side, as you can see we're running a broken set, and stat distribution wise we have 1 piece crit damage, 2 pieces attack bonus. One of the reasons why we're using a crit damage piece is the fact that Hex obviously has a strength card, which gives him 30% attack increase for 25 seconds, which just makes up for us needing to run more attack percent, which means we can go higher in crit damage and then multiply our damage. So yeah, a split of 1 to 2. And stat wise it is also rather simple. If you're running crit damage, look for crit rate and attack percent as the substats. So if you're running crit damage, look for attack percent and crit rate, and if you're running attack percent, look for crit rate, and bonus stats are going to be attack speed, rage regen, and attack flat. Those are just stats that are going to be a bonus. So stat wise, as you can see, you should aim for over 200% attack. Attack speed isn't as important, but if you can manage to find it, be it on the weapon or on the substats, definitely take it. It's going to be highly beneficial. And then crit damage wise, you do want at least obviously the 66% right here. And then if you can manage it, at least try to get it once on a substat. Which already brings us to artifacts. Artifacts are rather simple, and for mid-game Hex, honestly the best choice is just going to be Keen Wisdom, because Keen Wisdom again increases your attack, and with the usual damage formula being attack minus enemy defense and then multiplied by everything else, it is always a good idea to boost the base stat or the base damage and then have the rest increased with the further multipliers. Other artifacts that are still noticeable at mid-game are obviously going to be Idrit's Gaze, which is a fine choice. A Spirit Siphon, if you already have it, is definitely going to be even above Keen Wisdom and Idrit's Gaze. as well as Watchguard's Disguise is also going to be nice. As usual, you're going to have kind of a ranking on the right side here, which is also going to show artifacts I'm not going to name at this moment, which concludes mid-game hex. Alrighty, now on to late-game hex. So for late-game hex, we're going to implement a bit of what we have talked about for mid-game gear. So as you can see, we have a weapon that has attack percent, attack speed, and crit rate. And then we have armor that has attack percent, crit rate, crit damage. Now, obviously, you could also try to improve it with ancient armors. So you could technically get a chest piece that has attack percent, crit rate, crit damage, and attack speed. Or a weapon that has attack percent, crit rate, crit damage. So ancients, you need to have an ancient weapon for crit damage and an ancient armor for attack speed to appear on those. But that is at least besides the point. So that is again pretty much what you should be aiming for. And especially the chest piece, I highly recommend trying to look for attack percent, crit rate, crit damage chest piece. Set wise, we're again at the same kind of choosing point really, which is going to be Calamity, Annihilating Might, and the Warlord set. And now, why haven't I really talked about the Whirlwind set? That is because you kind of really want to try to move away from the Whirlwind set, considering the fact that you're starting to get attack speed as substats. So, as long as your attack speed is low on the lower end, you can still consider using the Whirlwind set. And especially if you have very good substats on the Whirlwind set, you can still take it over a Calamity set, but in general, if everything is equal, Calamity wins out, or even Annihilating Might, or then obviously the Warlord set. Alright, this concludes the left side gear. Let's talk about right side gear. Right side gear, we are going to run the same split as for mid game gear, so 1 times crit damage, 2 times attack percent, and substat wise it is rather simple, or basically rather simple. What you really want to look for is, again, on the crit percent piece, attack percent and crit rate, and then preferably starting to put in attack speed already. And then as a fourth stat, it would be again attack flat or rage region. Same goes for attack bonus, where you're going to look for crit rate, crit damage, and attack speed substats. And then if you can, add in some rage region and attack flat. But even a piece like this is still fine, especially if you can kind of compensate with your weapon if this piece doesn't have attack speed. Which then again brings us to a stat line that looks rather similar, which is going to be at least again 200% attack, over 100 attack speed. Even in this section it's already advised to go closer to 200 attack speed. Crit rate obviously as much or as close to 100% as possible. And then crit damage wise, obviously anything past 90% is advised. And the rage region stat isn't really that important, but it is nice to have. So before we move on to artifacts, let's still talk about set effects. Set effect wise, I'm going to name a couple of sets, I'm going to rank them for you, and I'm going to give some extra information for specific sets if needed. So number 1, and also the first one, is going to be Night Terror, followed by Hawkeye. Important for the Hawkeye set, you need at least a 1.2 second attack interval to make the Hawkeye set work. So you check your character, for example, this Hex at 264 attack speed isn't going to be able to make the Hawkeye set work. So after the Hawkeye set, we have the Fracture set, following the Fracture set is the Doom set, and then lastly we have the Fatality, Curse, Wisdom, and Glacier set. So before we get into the artifacts, still one more thing, and that is going to be Guild Boss. Now as you can see, we've changed a bit of Hex a bit, and the reason is that in Guild Boss, in comparison to everything else outside of Guild Boss has fairly low defense as well as resistances. So especially considering the fact that Hex has a card that gives him a 30% attack bonus, and you're using a Dolores, the perfect build for Hex when it comes to Guild Boss is actually going to be a 2 times crit damage and 1 times attack percent split, or a 2 times attack percent split and 1 times crit damage with the Annihilating Might set on the left side, which is also possible. But just keep in mind, if you want to play Guild Boss with your Hex, go higher in crit damage, lower in attack. But still, try to stay somewhere close to the 200% attack bonus. But it is nice to have. Artifact wise, let's talk artifacts, because this is where it gets really, really interesting. 25 Spirit Siphon, obviously the king of artifacts, the king of guild boss, the best marksman accessory, artifact, whatever you want to call it, but not anymore. Before we get into the ranking of all the other artifacts, let's talk a bit about Hex's new exclusive artifact. So Hex's new exclusive artifact, which I'm obviously going to show right here, and as you can see, it has the name the Sutra of Capris. So the Sutra of Capris, what it does is, as you can see, increases single target damage by 15% and can rapidly draw cards during the ultimate. So it is a Spirit Siphon on equal level, but with the added effect to rapidly draw cards during the ultimate. Now this might not sound like much, and also I didn't expect it to be that much, but a level 10 Hex exclusive artifact beats out a 25 Spirit Siphon, and it isn't even close. It isn't even close. Let me put up 2 screenshots. As you can see, the 10 Carapace, or the 10 exclusive artifact, did 10 million more damage. Obviously, I show you the Gear of Hex right here real quick. 10 million more damage than a 25 Spirit Siphon, and that is a A0 Hex. And now you might be thinking, oh, A0, maybe it changes through awakenings. It gets even worse. And A1 Hex. Why A1? Let's go above the A1 again. The A1 adds in a new card to be pulled. So you can now pull the Fool. And obviously, if you pull cards faster, you're going to draw cards faster. If you draw cards faster, you're going to do more damage. And so what happens is, from the initial 50k, you get an increase of around 20% using his exclusive artifact, and only an increase of around 10% using Spirit Siphon. So not only is Spirit Siphon still losing against the exclusive artifact, but the difference is getting bigger. And obviously, the higher your awakenings on Hex, the bigger the difference is going to be. The higher the upgrades on your exclusive artifact, the bigger the difference is going to be. Spirit Siphon is absolutely incomparable to a Hex's exclusive artifact, even at plus 10. And that is fucking mind-blowing. When I did those tests, I honestly, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. So yeah, exclusive artifacts are finally useful. Alright, now that we've talked about it, I'll again bring up a ranking somewhere around here. And obviously you'll see his exclusive artifact with the crown. But let's talk about the other artifacts real quick, just so we're not going to not mention anything. So artifact wise, now let's still properly rank artifacts. So obviously after the exclusive artifact, after Spirit Siphon, we still have Bloodborne Signet, which is a nice option, but less effective than a Spirit Siphon. After Spirit Siphon as the last mythic option, we have Reaper's Emblem. Reaper's Emblem is alright and might even come in rather nicely in Arena, but honestly, it isn't really worth it, and it is hard to proc, considering the fact that you do need to kill certain enemies and the damage increase only lasts a certain number of seconds depending on the upgrade. Then legendary artifact wise, we have Idrit's Gaze. Idrit's Gaze is a fine choice, but isn't as needed considering the fact that you have the strength increasing card, as well as really high multipliers on his damaging cards. And then as another artifact, you obviously have Keen Wisdom, but Keen Wisdom is only going to be equal to around the plus 10, maximum plus 13 of Spirit Siphon or Bloodborne Signet. But if you still haven't farmed heavily for artifacts, you can still perfectly well use a Keen Wisdom. Which concludes late game. Now it's time for the final hex build, and that is obviously going to be Endgame Hex. Now, Endgame Hex, let's get straight into it. Option-wise, you again have the usual Annihilating Might, Calamity set, or Warlord set, with Warlord set being obviously slightly superior to a Calamity set, adding in that extra attack speed. And stat-wise, for the weapon, you want either attack percent, crit rate, crit damage, or critical damage, attack speed. And chest piece wise, you want attack percent, crit rate, crit damage, and then anything else added on top of it, or you swap the combinations between the weapons, but you see it in the total stats. So that is about what you're looking for. If you can get anything more on the chest piece or weapon, be it attack flat, attack speed, or an additional rage region, that is obviously a bonus, but this is around the base stats you should be aiming for. Now set wise, let's talk about sets. Honestly, the best set for Hex is easily Soulbound Arcana, not just because he's mainly used in Guild Boss, but it just interacts well with his kit and it just comes out on top. So Soulbound Arcana is the best choice. Infernal Roar for shorter fights can also be used, but with how strong Hex is, it is actually not needed. And then also you obviously have on around the third place Ageless Wrath, because it just doesn't perform as well as either of the other two, but is still a very fine choice and definitely endgame worthy. Now stat distribution wise, we've already slightly talked about Guild Boss, but going into endgame you're going to realize your Hex is going to be strong enough, especially with his multipliers, with the extra 30% damage card. And unless we're talking arena and the end waves for a single target, you are going to be totally fine running around with a double crit damage split as well as 1 times attack percent. Substat wise, for crit damage you want attack percent, crit rate, attack speed, and then attack flat and rage region if you can manage it. For attack bonus, obviously crit rate, crit damage, attack speed, and then again attack flat and rage region if you can manage it. And now let's talk a bit about stats. Stat wise, you again don't want to go too far away from having 200% attack, so between around 180 to 220 is totally fine. Attack speed wise, if you choose to keep attack percent, crit rate, crit damage on your weapon, you're going to lose an slot in attack speed, so you're not going to get as high. But stat wise, you want to aim for around 250. Around 250 and you're going to be perfectly fine. Your Hex is going to work perfectly well. But if you add in an extra slot of attack speed, be it on the weapon or on the chest piece, you're going to be able to get to somewhere around 300 attack speed. Now, why 300 attack speed? Why be that specific? Because if you have 300 attack speed, as well as the Pantheon bonus and this attack speed bonus from the strength card, what you're going to get is an attack interval of instead of 1.1 second, a single second. So your attack speed interval is going to be a single second, and furthermore, where is it? Here we go. Obviously, the ultimate reduces the attack interval by 50%, which makes a reduction in attack interval even more effective. Now, obviously, at least on my main account, as you can see, Spirit Siphon is still the choice, but we all know Spirit Siphon's time is over. RIP Spirit Siphon, we see each other in the next live. It is time for the exclusive artifact, again shown here. It is absolutely disgusting and I hope I can get my hands on it as soon as possible. Which concludes Endgame Hex, and now onto use cases. Alright, when you talk about Hex use cases, there is one case no one can miss, and that is Guild Boss. Hex is an absolute machine in Guild Boss, and now with the introduction of his exclusive artifact, he becomes even more disgusting. He's probably vying with Zillitu when it comes to king and queen of Guild Boss, and now with the introduction of Lust there might be a bit more competition, but it is basically him and Zillitu being the king and queen of Guild Boss. Hex is disgusting in Guild Boss, that is all you need to know. He's going to pull numbers in the hundreds of millions, and yeah, use him in Guild Boss, and if you don't, you should check yourself out. Before we finish the whole Guild Boss segment though, let's talk a bit about team comps. So for Hex, especially the lower his awakening, the more important it is, specifically if you're below A3. So as you know, the A3 allows his ultimate to go longer, and if you don't have your Hex at A3 and you still want the fullest potential, obviously you want to increase his ult uptime, because especially considering the exclusive artifact, Hex's ultimate is where the damage is at. So what you're going to want to do is, if you run a Hex and if you have a there's two factors. Number one, if you have a Hex, you want to run him in a rage region team. Please ignore that, Lucas. If you run around a Hex, use him in a Rage Region team, because in a Rage Region team, you're going to increase his uptime and you can almost seamlessly put together ultimates. So you're going to use your ultimate, end up with around 80% rage, and then use your ultimate again, or introduce a layer and then just chain ultimates even without the A3. And now the second part, as you can also see, if you're running Hex and you can manage it, take him out of the Inferno team. Even if you don't have an Araka but only a Nuneria, if you can, take Hex out of the Inferno team, because Pyrus is stopping Hex from attacking. Pyrus, or even Twinfiend. Pyrus and Twinfiend, or Soul Cadence, are stopping Hex from attacking, and you're going to get more damage out of your Hex using him in a Piercer team in comparison to using him in a Nightmare team, in an Inferno team. So keep that one in mind and enjoy your Hex. He is going to absolutely annihilate everything. Now onto Arena. Basically there's a difference, okay? If your Hex has the exclusive artifact, he's viable for Arena. If he doesn't have it, you're going to ignore him. If your Hex doesn't have the exclusive artifact, you don't need to think about using him in Arena unless you literally don't have anything else. And for that case, if your Hex doesn't have his artifact, you can still try to use him in single target. But if you have his artifact, you're going to find usage in anti-air as well as a single target Arena. And honestly, it obviously is hard to test because we don't have it, but I can almost guarantee you he is going to be a force to be reckoned with if you have his exclusive artifact and it comes to anti-air or single target Arena, especially considering his low cost, great damage, and overall huge kit and disgusting synergies. Which concludes the Arena. When you're talking about where to use them, obviously there's one piece of content you can't miss, and that is going to be Infernal Trial. So no surprise here, Hex is very useful in Infernal Trial, and surprise! Alright, now let's talk gear rates for Hex. So for Hex you can cross out gear rate 1, considering the fact that he's a single target damage dealer. Obviously he does magic damage, but it is not really going to be helpful against a lot of enemies. But again, the exclusive artifact is super broken. But if we're talking fair gear, in comparison to the stage, he's going to not perform well for the stage. So gear rate 2. Gear rate 2, for the moment, a Hex without exclusive artifact is not able to wipe out all the enemies. And that is what I'm going to test in the next couple of days. Is, can a Hex with an exclusive artifact effectively clear gear rate 2? And if it works, I'm going to post a video. If not, I'm going to put down a pinned comment that says that it doesn't. Now, gear rate 3. Gear rate 3 for Hex. So, even though Hex is a piercer, he is a magic damage dealing unit. And as a magic damage dealing unit, he is in a bad matchup when it comes to this fight over here. Because number one, the magic resistance of the enemies is always higher than the defense. And number two, the boss right over here, as you can see, under magic barrier, the Chthonic Enchantress increases magic rest for all allies. So with reasonable gear in comparison to the stage, obviously you can overgear and make him work, but with reasonable gear in comparison to the stage, Hex stops working at 19. So you can use him for 319 and stay tuned for the Gear Rate 2 test, and we're about to see if it works. Now on to the last piece of content to consider, and that is going to be artifact material rate. Hex as a platform damage dealer for artifact material rate is a very great choice because he has a lot of damage potential, he has a lot of burst, and he might feel a bit slow at times, but as soon as you introduce again the single most important part, his exclusive artifact, he'll absolutely annihilate AMR. So yeah, what you need to do is make sure every one of your other units stays alive. You can buy yourself some time by, for example, having a Vortex, heal everything full, take out Vortex, putting in a Hex, boosting that Hex with the constants, or just having the Hex in general, having Hex ult, taking Hex out, putting in Vortex again and healing your units. So as a platform burst unit for AMR, be it 18 or potentially the 19, 20 and 21, Hex is approved. Now this concludes my Hex guide. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the Gear Rate 2 test, and honestly, exclusive artifacts are finally starting to become good.